All right, we'll leave it there, and we will have this discussion now with my friend Doug Glanville, longtime big leaguer, now with ESPN. He does a ton of games on TV and ESPN radio. He also is on Substack. You should read his writing because he is a brilliant writer, a former professor at Penn as well. Doug Glanville, how are you, sir?
Adam, doing well. Yeah, great to catch up. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Your brother's already texted me. Shouts to you, Ken. All right, let's just dive right in here. When you heard the news that the permanent banishment list would become a lifetime banishment list, which would open the door for Rose and Jackson and Buck Weaver or Ed Cicotti to get into the Hall of Fame, what were your thoughts?
I wasn't surprised. I think that there's been a lot of indications from Rob Manfred and the commissioner's office that they would reconsider in death. So it seemed like that was something that they had been weighing for a while, and it just sort of reached that conclusion because that was the barrier, right? It was the sort of policy to say, all right, well, you committed these crimes against the game, and we have to ban you, and it was permanent, but then they kind of reduced it to lifetime, and so it made sense that this was going to be the way they would start to consider it and reconsider it.
Would you vote for Rose for the Hall?
Well, I think that's the big question.
Right.
I have a lot of issues with, certainly Rose, and then of course there's the PED world around that. And I think they're different, because the thing about Rose is, he played and that was his game, right? I think the problem with PEDs relates to like the numbers by which you're being judged on are inflated by the choices you made. But the issue with Rose for me is that it's even though like he makes a choice that's not necessarily statistically relevant to how you judge him, his transgressions impact the larger game in a different way, right? Because now it's like, so I played through my whole career and through the 90s and 2000s, and they're like, oh, well, this isn't a real game because everybody's throwing everything, right? I mean, so when you bring the entire game into question because integrity and it's not real, not authentic, and people are throwing games and fixing games, that's in many ways a bigger problem. And so, the thing about in life, I understand why you don't want to, have him celebrate in life unless you make some admission and other things have to happen. So you wait until he's gone. But the challenge about being gone is is the damage not still there? Right. I mean, we have all kinds of history that we're always debating on what we should include and discuss and where it is relevant to today. And, whether it's slavery, whether, you go back and try to figure out is the damage just completed because someone passed away? And understanding that he himself can't enjoy the fruits of being inducted, you still have a legacy of what was the choices that were made. And that is really difficult to sort out. And in the end, it's voters, right? The voters get to decide. And I think Rob Manfred also wanted to remove the Bushes to say, okay, voters, it's on you now. I'm not the one, you could decide whatever you want to do. And the Hall makes the same statement. They're like, well, we're not voting. We're not setting the rules. We just people vote. And then we just endorse it and then put it in the museum. Right. I think a lot of times when people step back, there's their hands are up, kind of like, well, no, hey, I'm not the one stopping them. So it is going to end up in the voters' lap.
Doug Glanville is joining us here, ESPN Major League Baseball analyst at Doug Glanville on Twitter. The way I've said it is that performance-enhancing drugs, and this is the main difference, this has distorted the data, as you said, on which we judge these players. I think we can make determinations that certain players would have been Hall of Famers beyond the gargantuan numbers they put up. But it's hard we just don't know when it starts, all of that. And what Rose did was call into question the legitimacy of competition. And as a manager, and the arguments that have always been made about Rose as a manager, well, he never bet on his team to lose, except that he didn't always bet on his team to win. So those days where he didn't bet on his team to win could have simply been a signal to a gambler. And it wasn't like he was betting on his phone. He wasn't opening up the FanDuel app, right? He was betting with some bookmaker who keeping all of his records in a notebook somewhere. And I also think that the Shoeless Joe Jackson, he hit 375 in that series, so he wasn't really throwing the games. Like, how do we know that? Just because he hit 375 doesn't mean he didn't right. contribute.
Exactly.
And he took the money, which is really all you need to know. He just took the money. So
right, but then but the thing about Rose, okay, and the thing about Rose and why the fact that he bet for his team is kind of immaterial. This is why I think it's immaterial. All right, so let's just go through a season. All right, you bet on a game. Let's say you bet on a game 2 of a 3-game series,
right.
Reds Phillies, and your closer, okay, is pitching. All right, game 1. Now maybe you have a better matchup on game 3, and you might go a lefty against game 3, but you have to win that one game,
right?
Because you bet it. Then you empty everybody out, and then you don't care about tomorrow. That's the problem. Like in a baseball season, it's 162 games. You can't play Game 7 every single night. You would have no bullpen. You'd have no starters. You'd have nothing left. So you pace yourself in a series. So the fact that he bet on his team or whatever doesn't matter because you're adjusting the competition to serve your own selfish needs and goals. And whether he's addicted or whatever, all these other things, that's a whole sidebar. But so I think that doesn't really matter to me. And I think the thing with PEDs is like we don't know when people started, stopped, and the issue the hall has or any voter has is you're trying to figure out like these like rules around data that is skewed. You don't know where it began, and everything just becomes tainted. And so it's like this individual choice to really just cast an entire shadow over the sport. And nobody is bigger. Nobody should be bigger than the sport. And so that's my issue. Like, okay, it's fine. Like players made all this money. They got rings. They won championships. Do you need to be enshrined? Like, so that's how I would think as a voter. And I have an issue with enshrining people that compromise the entire integrity of the game. And only because time went on and we just have amnesia or people died, we act like it. Okay, well, I guess it doesn't matter anymore. I just think it's like it does matter. I'm still around.
Right.
I'm still feeling the impact of all these players' choices. I played against the Reds. I mean, it's like I don't know how death becomes a hall pass, right? I mean, I understand like we as a society don't want to like spit on people's grave and
sure.
And I respect people, but do you have to have amnesia? I mean, there's people walking around all the time, but I've had experiences people who were horrible in life. And then they, and because they pass away, do their scars go away on what they did to all these people? They don't. So I don't think it's a hall pass. And like I said, I'm not a voter, and I think it's a tough vote because of all the layers. He's a great hitter. He's one of the greatest of all time, obviously. Yep. And I don't think that changes because of his gambling per se. But the problem is, what game do you have left? If he was allowed to just continue to do what he was doing. You don't have a game. You have people thinking you're throwing everything.
Right. He was put on the banned list because nobody could trust that if he was involved that he wouldn't have some influence over a game, right? That's why somebody in that regard, and it is the number one sin you can commit against baseball, right? It's posted in every clubhouse. It was. I don't know if it still is, right?
Every clubhouse.
Do you remember seeing it when you were in big league clubhouses?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's not like after a while, the good fortune of playing a long time, everything becomes background,
right?
But you're well aware of it. And the thing is, like, yes, the sports have an issue because gambling is legalized and it's all swirling around anyway. I mean, that's another issue.
Sure.
Because it's like, so you have that challenge, but it's you talk about some level of integrity of the game, and I think that's the issue that where Rose leaves his own individual choices into something bigger, where once again you don't know what's real or not, and PEDs did it in a different way, and so if we're just saying like, hey, I don't care, it's just about the numbers, then our sort of our baseball god is there are the numbers,
right?
And let's just say what it is, and then you're just saying I don't care how you get these numbers, as long as you have the most. And that just sounds like a culture of just hoarding, and we don't care how you get there. We just care that you get there. And I'm not sure that's really what we want. I'm not saying it all hangs on Pete Rose or Bonds or any of these individuals per se, but it certainly is those symbols of what happened to our baseball culture is why we continue to talk about it. And the fact is, the impact doesn't go away. That's the thing that I kind of resent as a player. And it's like you can't ever get away from these guys' choices. And it's like you just can't play the game. And once again, they're not alone. I don't put it all on their feet, but it's just like the game is in question because of those choices.
Doug Glanville is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. If Rose and others, and for the sake of this part of the conversation, we'll draw the PED users in, the Bonds, the Clemens, the A-Rods, the Manny Ramirez, the Mark McGuires of the world, draw them in. And I think we have to assume that there are players who somehow escaped detection that are already in the Hall. If noted on their plaque, the transgressions, would that make it easier, more fair, or is it just the idea that they're enshrined? Because I think it would just be the idea that they are enshrined that would be the problem if we're going to have a problem with anything.
Well, I mean, what does enshrining mean? I'm gonna encase this person in gold for what? Like, what's my reasoning? I mean, if you kind of say, like, part of the problem that, like, okay, the asterisk, for example.
Right.
So yeah, I put an asterisk on it. Well, the challenge is you can mark something, but what's sort of, I know this is in defense of, let's say, Bonds or guys in the crosshairs of this, is like there are all these people that got away with it.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you pick him or any particular player when like all these players kind of got away with it? So it's like, that's kind of the issue. And the Hall of Fame always says, like, look, we're a museum, okay? Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's enshrinement, but that's by voters. But we're a museum, and the thing about a museum is you just tell the history as it is.
Sure.
You just tell it as that's what happened, and this guy's here, and like I was on with Jason Stark on our podcast on Starkville every week, and we talked about this a while back, and we talked about it again yesterday with Jim Leland, and one of the points, he kind of asked this question: can you tell the story of baseball without these figures, right? The home run leader, the hit leader, and I'm like, absolutely, you can tell it, because I think it's a much more compelling story for baseball. The fact that these incredibly great, statistically great players are not in the Hall is like, that's something I want to know more about. Why? I mean, that's the story to me. I mean, there's a lot of there's players I played against that had 10 at-bats in the big leagues that have more compelling stories, because maybe they might have just done it honestly, but they also just had stories of how they even got there.
Right.
Eddie Oropesa had a defect from Cuba and risked his life and stayed away from his family for 5 years until they reunited in the Marlins dugout. That's pretty amazing. Like, that's a story. Why do you have to have 4,000 hits to be the keeper of all the stories of baseball? You don't. So I just think we have to realize, like, and then if you look at the Negro League stats, you want to talk about people who are made invisible, and completely diminished. So we didn't tell their story. We ignored their story. We tried to erase it. We tried to, and we're still trying to erase things. And I still think, like, well, if that's, so the game can survive,
right?
Clearly, without them, it can survive.
Doug Glanville here, and the truth is that Rose's accomplishments are already in Cooperstown. There is a display to his career achievements with artifacts and uniforms and bats and stuff like that. So that's there. I have not been to the Hall of Fame in a long time. I'm sure we've got Bonds and A-Rod and I'm sure all those guys are represented in some way in the Hall, even without being enshrined. I look differently. It's weird. I looked at the PED users differently because my assumption is they did that. Yes, they got an edge, but also in some ways they knew other players were getting that edge. I always argued that Lance Armstrong should have come out and said, I did steroids because everybody else on this tour was doing steroids. I just did it better. And it would have, had some of these players admitted and kind of fallen on the sword for it, we might have looked at it differently. I don't know, but I look at those two issues differently.
And we may have. I think the contrition. I think it matters. That I think the challenge. It's sort of like when I wrote this piece about sort of bonds and the sort of questions around PEDs in baseball like a couple of years ago. And the thing is, like, a lot of times I would go and talk about it, and then someone would say to me like, "Well, hey, there was a pitcher that Bonds hit a home run off of this pitcher that was on steroids," and they give me these examples about everyone was doing it. But the problem is, when you're talking to a player who played clean, it falls flat. Like, it's like, you're using examples that swirl around all the players that actually didn't make that choice. It's like, so, because I have no sympathy. Like, okay, let's just say in Bond's case or whoever, let's say you're already the greatest player in the game. Like, people recognize you as the greatest player and you're clean. Okay, so isn't it actually worse? Isn't it worse that you might have taken PEDs after you already were dominating?
I agree with that. Yeah.
So it's like that's a tough one as well. Like, I could at least work with someone. Like, I had teammates that grew up in the Dominican Republic, where their careers were flatlining in AAA, and they had no running water in their town, and they were taking care of like their siblings, and they knew that their career was about to end if they didn't do something. Okay. Like, I'm not saying like that says steroids are great, but it just at least gives you context of like, okay, that's a desperate situation. But when you had nothing but privilege all along, come on. So, I mean, I think that's just part of that. So with Rose, like, yeah, I mean, maybe he had an addiction, maybe he had all these other issues, but it's like, you have to make a stand saying the game is bigger than anybody. I don't care how many home runs you hit. I don't care how many hits you had. I don't care how many Cy Young awards you won. I don't care. So where do you draw that line? I don't know, but I think the hall will always be a museum, and that's a good thing because it tells you unfiltered, this is what happened, and those guys will be through that. But like I said, I'm not a voter. I mean, I probably wouldn't have voted for anybody for the last 20 years. I have no idea. But they do have a tough challenge. I concede that, and I'm very curious how this plays out.
Doug Glanville, you are the best. I appreciate your time, sir. Your brother's been hanging on every word. I will talk to you very soon.